I'm making a series of videos that demonstrate that evolution fails as a scientific theory on multiple levels. Now, if you ever question evolution, you might be told things like, evolution is supported by overwhelming scientific evidence, or that the only people that reject evolution are religious fundamentalists. Now, the reason for these outlandish types of statements is because evolution is bankrupt as a scientific theory. Proponents of evolution can't answer any serious scientific challenges. And if you challenge evolution, you're likely to be presented with elaborate smokescreens to create an illusion of evidence. You might be told that evolution is an established fact and that the only people who reject evolution are scientifically ignorant. So what is this overwhelming evidence for evolution that people keep talking about? Here are 8 categories of evidences used to justify evolutionary theory. And virtually every argument they're going to hear is a variation of one of these themes. In reality, this is not scientific evidence. Let me explain. Homology. This refers to similarities between species, like the anatomy of a human hand and an ape hand. Look how much they look alike, obviously proving a common ancestor, right? Well, this is not self-evident science. This is a philosophy-based hunch. And the underlying argument is that it disproves intelligent design. That is, a god would not have designed an ape hand and a human hand to look so similar. Now, a variant of this argument is molecular homology. This sounds scientific, but it can't be defended without references to intelligent design. For example, Richard Dawkins was asked in an interview what he considered to be the most compelling evidence for evolution. In his response, molecular homology.
Perhaps the single most convincing fact, observation that you could point to would be the pattern of resemblances that you see when you compare the genes using modern DNA techniques, actually looking at the letter-to-letter correspondences between genes. Compare the genes of any pair of animals you like, pair of animals, pair of plants, and then plot out the resemblances, and they fall in a perfect hierarchy, a perfect family tree. And the only alternative to it being a family tree is that the intelligent designer deliberately set out to deceive us in the most underhand and devious manner.
Okay, there you have it. Richard Dawkins is asked to encapsulate what he considers to be the most compelling evidences for evolution. And notice he can't make a case without bringing up religion. So whenever someone brings up molecular homology, including things like molecular atavisms, ERVs, transposons, pseudogenes, understand that these are all philosophical arguments made in an attempt to disprove intelligent design. Imperfections of nature is another common argument, and this is also a philosophical argument. And a classic example of a supposed imperfection is the recurrent laryngeal nerve. In mammals, the nerve goes from the brain to the larynx by first looping around the aortic arch. So in the case of a giraffe, this means that the nerve impulses travel an extra 15 feet or so. Now, this is deemed to be a striking example of an unintelligent design in nature. Listen to this clip of Richard Dawkins witnessing the dissection of a giraffe's neck.
There's a nerve called the recurrent laryngeal, which runs from the brain, and its end organ is the larynx, and you think it would just go straight there. But in a human, what it does is goes down into the chest, loops around one of the main arteries in the chest, and then goes straight back up again. Obviously a ridiculous detour. No engineer would ever make a mistake like that.
So in the first place, Dawkins is dead wrong when he says that the recurrent laryngeal nerve is not intelligently designed. There are anatomic reasons for this circuitous route, but most importantly, he's making a philosophical argument. He expects you to accept evolution by default. Now, if he wanted to make a scientific argument, he needs to explain first how mutations created the recurrent laryngeal nerve, and second, how the recurrent laryngeal nerve managed to innervate the aorta, the heart, the lungs, and the esophagus without looping around the aortic arch. Now, the next argument, continuity of life. This is another philosophy-based argument. For example, it's claimed that the complex eye evolved gradually. And to prove this, variations of organs of vision in mollusks are pointed out, from relatively simple to complex, from a flat, photosensitive spot in a limpet to a complex camera eye in a squid. This isn't science. This is conjecture based on homology within a paradigm of atheism. It's assumed that an intelligent designer would not create variations of eye morphology in different species. Now, the next point is vestigial structures, and this is another common philosophy-based argument you're going to hear. For example, Jerry Coyne, who's a prominent evolutionary biologist at University of Chicago, he argued that muscles that move the ears are vestigial from ancestors. Listen to this clip he made to promote his book of why he believes the evidence of evolution is so overwhelming.
Vestigial organs, for example, humans have muscles that move their ears that don't really do us any good, but they're the remnants of muscles that are useful in our relatives like cats and dogs to detect sound. And well, I'll demonstrate that right now. Maybe you can see these ears moving. So that's of no use to us, but it's very useful for your cat to locate sounds. We have the evolutionary remnants of that trait. So that's more evidence for evolution.
The existence of muscles to move the ears is only a philosophy-based argument, and a very weak one at that. Now, embryology is another evidence presented. For example, Theodosius Dobzhansky was one of the founders of the modern synthesis. And in a widely quoted paper, he asks why a human embryo should have unmistakable gill slits, unless, of course, our ancestors had gills. And he justifies this view by mocking the idea that this was not intelligently designed. Of course, this is a philosophical argument and isn't even logical from a philosophical or scientific perspective. The pharyngeal arches are not gills. They're precursors to structures in the jaw and neck. Now, the fossil record. It's astounding that this is presented as evidence because the fossil record contradicts evolution. The only way it's used to support evolution is through selective evaluation. What you have is a collection of anecdotes, while most paleontologists ignore the many failed predictions of the fossil record. Now, one of the most celebrated examples of evolution today is the supposed evolution of the whale. However, if you look at the evidence, it's extremely unconvincing. Listen to this clip of Richard Dawkins.
There are plenty of intermediate fossils, and one of the best examples is whales. The modern whales are up there. Here's a series of fossils back in time. Dorodon, about 36 million years ago. Rhodocetus, about 47.5 million years. Pachycetus, about 48.5 million years. And you can see they form a lovely series of intermediates. As you go from old to young, Pachycetus, Rhodocetus, gradually losing the hind legs to Dorodon, which has almost lost the hind legs completely. Modern whales have completely lost the hind legs. There are some vestigial bones, some remnant bones buried deep inside the body. A lovely series of intermediates getting progressively more and more specialized in living in the sea.
So as the basis for his argument, Dawkins notes that Dorodon has vestigial hind legs. Now, these are generally described by anatomists as hind flippers, and some modern dolphins are born with rudimentary hind flippers, and these are not legs. Fish have pelvic fins. This in no way suggests that a fish descended from a four-legged creature. The whale is a mammal and exhibits features of a mammalian prototype: lungs, placenta, mammary glands, and in some cases rudimentary hair. This doesn't imply descent from a land-based mammal. The inference of evolution is a philosophical hunch. Also notice that he states that Pachycetus and Rhodocetus gradually lose their hind legs, when there is no evidence of this even in the illustrations. Understand that this is what is widely considered to be the most compelling evidence of evolution in the fossil record. Dawkins shows two four-legged creatures that show no gradualistic change, and a whale with pelvic flippers similar to those seen in sharks. In other words, Dorodon was not transitional, but was a fully developed whale with perfected flukes that suddenly sprouted from a conventional tail. Dawkins is hoping that you'll just take his word that this documents evolution, and that you'll not look at the evidence critically for what it is. Now, next, biogeography. Observations that are consistent with evolution, like the lack of amphibians and land mammals in Hawaii. This is argued to be proof of evolution. But this is based on a philosophical belief that an intelligent creator should have placed amphibians and land mammals in Hawaii. At the same time, facts that are impossible through an evolutionary model, like the existence of monk seals in Hawaii, these are relegated to a category of evolutionary mysteries, and many other examples similar to this can be cited. Now, the observation of evolution. When all else fails, you'll be presented with word games. The breeding of dogs has been known for over 5,000 years and is not evolution. And the fact that this is used as evidence for evolution indicates that there is no evidence for fundamental change in species. Now, evolution is often presented to the public as if it's hard science. And let me show you some examples of what I'm talking about. Listen to this statement by Kenneth Miller.
Very good reason. And that is, in the near 150 years since Darwin first described the theory of evolution, an overwhelming amount of evidence has piled up, many of it from unexpected directions, that has brilliantly supported his original idea. And today we see that evolution is supported by paleontology, by physiological evidence, by genetics, and increasingly by the new fields of molecular biology and genome analysis. And within the scientific community, what people have seen is that as new techniques and new tools and new ways of looking at things have come online, they've increasingly provided depth and a greater understanding to all of us as to how the theory of evolution is applicable to the data that we see in nature. So the support for evolution within the scientific community is absolutely overwhelming, and the reason for that is because the evidence in favor of evolution is equally overwhelming.
This is a typical presentation of evolution, and it might sound like a lot of evidence. Most people don't even understand the arguments that he's presenting. Paleontology doesn't support evolution. The only evidence given are special pleading anecdotes. And physiologic systems, molecular biology, genetics, and genome analysis, these sound scientific. These are nothing more than philosophy-based arguments founded on the attempted disproof of God. Now, Kenneth Miller sounds convincing, but provides no scientific evidence of what he believes is true. Now, listen to what Richard Dawkins says.
I had said that evolution is a fact in the same sense as it's a fact that the Earth orbits the Sun.
The orbit of the Earth around the Sun is based on observation and on mathematical proofs. Evolution is not based on observation and fails all mathematical tests. So understand, when you listen to statements like this, you're listening to propaganda. Often evolution is presented as if it's been subjected to rigorous scientific scrutiny. And if you're skeptical, you might be confronted with a lot of arguments that you don't understand from different fields of science. Listen to what Kenneth Miller says.
But in those 150 years, not a single observation, not a single piece of experimental evidence has been unearthed or has come about that has contradicted the theory of evolution, and that's why it has the high scientific standing that it does.
Evolution has not been contradicted by a single observation. The theory of evolution doesn't even have a plausible mechanism. And what's observed is that random mutations always create random outcomes, never new information. And then he says, a single piece of experimental evidence? What about over 100 years of fruit fly breeding experiments that have decisively failed to produce any expected evolution? And what about the failed predictions of the junk DNA paradigm? Evolution is defended by elaborate claims like this because proponents don't want it to be subjected to scrutiny. Kenneth Miller was instrumental in arguing in court that intelligent design should be excluded from biology classrooms. Evolution is actively shielded from criticism. If the claims of evolution are scrutinized, evolution collapses under its own weight. Here's a typical statement from the American Academy of Science. Look how contradictory this is. There is no controversy. The evidence is overwhelming. However, dissenting views shouldn't be discussed because students might be confused. The biggest reason most people believe in evolution is because of consensus. and this includes scientists. What I'm saying is that they believe in something because they trust in the opinions of others, not because they've actually thought about the plausibility. They're intimidated into believing something that contradicts common sense because of an illusion of evidence that's been presented. No one can look at the facts for what they are and believe that random mutations could create something like a whale from a four-legged land mammal. Unfortunately, evolution's believed because most people prefer to jump on the popular bandwagon and be identified with the intellectual elite. Again, specific challenges to evolution are never squarely addressed. And if you do bring up something that threatens evolution, you'll get hit with an avalanche of distractions. Invariably, the subject will be changed. If you read the comments on the video presentations I've made, you'll see this pattern. I appreciate your interest in these videos, and I'm planning to do a lot more in the future, so I hope you'll subscribe to my channel.